Just realized I was muted. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to do a quick little intro, and then we'll get started, and I'll call the panelists. My name is Francisco Mendoza. I am the marketing manager at the Playwrights Realm, and my pronouns are he, him. As I said, I'm just going to go through a couple of logistics before I bring on board our critics. So first thing is, feel free to use the Q&A section to submit any questions to our panelists. And if there's time at the end of the session, they'll get to that question. If it's something that I can answer myself, I'll do the two. Let's just keep the chat for any responses or technical difficulties. If you want questions, answers, please use the Q&A function. And if you see a question that's been submitted there that you would also like to see answered, feel free to upvote it. Also, I've turned on the captions, so if you need them, feel free to go ahead and turn them on. And we are doing reimbursements for anyone who has incurred in caretaking costs to attend this through our Radical Parent Inclusion Project. So if that's the case, there will be a link in the follow-up email where you can submit your expenses to get a reimbursement. Just going through our values really quick, the Realm seeks to be an equitable, inclusive, anti-oppressive, and anti-racist organization. More information on our mission and values is available on our website, which I am linking to in the chat in a moment. Those values extend to this virtual space, so if at any time you feel you experience something that is not in alignment with those values, please feel free to chat me directly, or you can follow up via email. And here is that link in the email that you can email me at. I am joining you today from the traditional unceded territories of the Lenni Lenape and Canarsie peoples in Brooklyn. I offer recognition and respect and acknowledge that colonization is an ongoing process that continues to impact the lives and lands of Native communities. I want to acknowledge that in addition to the physical land that we occupy today, the platforms, technology, and equipment that we are using consume resources that are based in physical lands and are now universally accessible to all peoples and communities. We're sharing a link for those of you who would like to learn more about the spaces we occupy, and I invite you to take a moment to name them in the chat. So here's the link. And that is all. So I'm gonna welcome Scheherazade to turn on her camera. She'll be leading the panel today, and then our wonderful panelists can introduce themselves, and I will be back at the end of the session. Thank you.
You're welcome. Hi, everybody. My name is Scheherazade, and thank you so much first and foremost to the Playwrights Realm and to Francisco for this invitation. My camera decided to go blue. Don't be blue. It's blue. I'm blue all year round. My name is Scheherazade Quiroga. I'm delighted to be here to talk about criticism with some of my favorite critics. As it says on my Twitter bio, and I'm reading it, I am a TV and musical theater mastermind with a knack for niche pop references. I am originally from Caracas, Venezuela, and I am a performer, a producer, writer, and I was delighted to be part of the first cohort of the BIPOC Critics Lab, which is how I came to be familiar with the Playwrights Realm. I wrote a piece for them, and I'm delighted to have this conversation with our panelists today. I'm going to invite all of them to please turn their cameras on, as well as their microphones, of course, because we want to listen to what they have to say. And they look fabulous as always. And I'm going to ask each one of you to just introduce yourself to the panel. I just have to start with the Taylor Swift sweater that Mr. Jose Solis is wearing. So let's start with Jose. Go ahead. Oh, and the Taylor Swift thermos, or is it Kylie Minogue? I mean, I'm
all Taylor today.
Cool. Go ahead, Jose. And then you can go to whoever else you would like within the panel.
Okay, thank you, Shehe, and thank you for having me. I'm Jose Solis. I'm a cultural critic. I'm the founder and director of the BIPOC Critics Lab, and I also co-created the show Token Theater Friends. I write for myriad outlets and publications out there, and I'm also on Twitter all the time, except when my internet is not working, because I'm currently in my home country, Honduras. So hi from all the way down here. And I'll pass it on to Ashley.
Hi, happy to be here. I'm Ashley Lee, and I'm a LA Times entertainment reporter, writing about theater as well as, especially in the past year, film and TV. Happy to be here. Good to see you all.
Good to see you.
And
Who do you
I'll
want to pass it?
throw it to Steven.
Hey, I'm Steven. I am a actor, dancer, and multimedia journalist. I'm a current grad student at USC in the specialized journalism program of the arts. And I have written for a bunch of different publications, and I focus a lot on social justice, dance, and theater. And then I'll throw it off to Pascal.
Hello, everyone. My name is Pascal Florestal, she, her, hers. I'm a director, dramaturg, educator, and writer based in Boston, Massachusetts. I'm also the education director of the Front Porch Arts Collective, which is a Black-led theater company here in Boston, trying to create more racial equity in the Boston theater scene. As the education director, I created the Young Critics program, which started in 2019 to incubate the next generation of arts critic here in the Boston theater scene. So though I may not be a critic at trade, my goal is to create more opportunities for young people, especially young people of color, to be critics as we move forward into this world that is full of not that many people of color as critics. So I'm hoping to create more of those opportunities and pipelines for young people. And it's so great to be a part of this panel today.
Of course, thank you all for being here. And I think whether you are a writer or you call yourself a critic or not, as a person involved with the arts, we are bound to bump elbows or to cross our path with a critic one way or the other. And I'm a sucker for definitions. And I think one of the main issues that happens with critics and with criticism is that there are plenty definitions of criticism, whereas you go to the application as in social sciences, or whether you can get picky and want to start analyzing what the differences between a critic versus a review is when you're coming in writing. I wanted to ask of each of you, what is your personal definition of criticism, whether coming from a writer and critic or whether coming from a director or educator? Let's start. Who wants to start? Go ahead, so Jose.
So a lot of people always say, they make fun when someone's like, like saying something on social media or whatever and saying everyone's a critic. And that is precisely what I believe in. Everyone is a critic. Someone asked me just over this weekend, when I told them that I taught criticism, they asked me if I had a philosophy major, if I had a PhD in philosophy. And instead, I'm all about dismantling this idea that in order to be a critic, you need to have this extensive academic preparation, because that's completely elitist, and it's completely, it's one of the forms of gatekeeping. So my definition, sorry, I'm just talking a lot. My definition of a critic is in fact a cheerleader for whatever art form it is that you're interested in, a cheerleader for anything that excites you, anything that makes you feel something, and also anything that challenges you, and also something that you don't necessarily agree with. So when I became a critic specifically, I wanted to have conversations. So I'm like, if you happen to read or engage with my work, imagine me talking to you with my pom-poms.
Awesome. Who wants to share their definition? How about you, Ashley?
I'm gonna need a minute, I'm not gonna lie. I think it's just my definition of what the criticism I wanna do is changing. So I'm gonna let somebody else go first.
Great. Wanna jump in, Pascal?
Sure. I think some of the things I like to think about when I talk about the importance of criticism is what that conversation, the dialogue is between the artist and the community that it's bringing it to. And I think so often it's about what are the lenses and the different experiences that people bring to these art forms that we experience, and what is that conversation like? And I think that's what I enjoy about criticism. And I also see it sometimes as our opportunity to archive some art and different kinds of art experiences. Because I think so often, when I think of criticism, it's an opportunity for us to see a piece of art that maybe we can't see all the time, or at least don't have that experience of seeing it as often as something that's maybe on Netflix or that has more of a streaming or a longer life. So I always think of criticism as an opportunity to archive the art as well as have a conversation. And I think that's what is exciting to me about it. And I love, Jose, what you said about dismantling this idea of what it means to come to criticism. So I think that's what creates the gates for a lot of people not to be seen, and for those perspectives not to be valid enough, or not to be deemed the perspectives that we should be listening to. And low-key, Ashley Lee, I read your articles all the time. So seeing you here, this panel is like making my day, just so you know.
You're so sweet, thank you.
How about you, Stephen? What's your particular or your personal definition of criticism?
Yeah, it's funny because I was looking through my notes from the BIPOC Critics Lab to like, just to rehash like what I was thinking about in terms of criticism. And I remember I saw a note that was like, what I want to do with criticism is to help evoke an emotion or a feeling that is created by a work of art. And I still stand by that, but I'm going to add to that as well, and bring in the community aspect and talk about how the critic, like in my mind, that the critic not only does that, but it also contextualizes it for an audience to help them, kind of see the importance of the art and how it can speak to them as well.
I love that. So between cheerleader, connection, archive, and create a record of this piece of art happening in a specific time or evoking an emotion. I think once you sit down, or my experience has been, once I sit down to write, is because there was an emotion or there was something produced in me by this artwork that I want to put in paper and that I want to share with people. However, I also find myself, perhaps as a beginner, quote unquote, critic, when I sit down, all these ideas start coming to my mind of what a critic is. And I think that's hilarious, because I was having a conversation yesterday with my sister, we're both journalists, and we know the definition, we know the theory, we know what it's supposed to be like. And then I say, what's your idea of a critic? And we inevitably go to these very, not very nice spoken, high on a pedestal people that are supposed to tell you if what you're doing is worth your time or not. And we see that in media all the time. There is, I think, within media itself as well, a little banking of, this sells, like this is sensationalist or not, but this is what sells. So as also an educator of young performers, I reach out to them and say, hey, what's your idea of a critic? Have you had any experiences with criticism? And the answers I got were, they're scared of critics, and they cannot give me a definition of what a critic is, but they know it's someone that they're not supposed to be friends with, which I find it terribly sad, right? And it contrasts. I mean, I see you all nodding with this idea of this is what is presented to us as criticism, even in, Rory Gilmore, that episode, I'm sorry, I'm quoting Gilmore Girls, that episode in which she has to do for Yale, that criticism piece, she messes with the poor overweight ballerina. And in a rather mean way, because it's sort of like, that's the idea of criticism. So with these negative connotations, how do we break that? What is a critic? If everybody is a critic, what differentiates a critic from any person on Twitter saying, this place sucks, for example?
Well, I'll say that I think it's interesting because, like, when you think the word review, right? Mm-hmm. If we're talking about a product review of, like, I don't know, the new phone, right? You got some tech blogger who got early access to the phone, and they're like, here are all the new features, should you buy it or not? It's very much a like, is it worth your time kind of a thing? And that's also true across the board in some way of, like, film and TV or music. Like, here's a piece of writing that helps you comprehend this, but you can also consume it yourself, readily available because of, all the technology we have. But theater, your writing has to also stand on its own as a piece of art in itself. So there's that whole other realm. But as far as, like, I agree with everybody else, like contextualizing and archiving and talking about the art for the art form for the community, but I feel like a critic can be so helpful as like a translator, not necessarily like, here's this piece of art and like what it means for the white gaze. I definitely do not mean that. But as Stephen was saying, like, how can I help illuminate this? Or as Jose was saying, like, how can I further spotlight what art is happening here? And of course, to still be critical of it and because every critique is like for the growth of the art form and the artist. And yeah, I don't know where this started of just being like not being friends with artists, because I feel, oh man, I mean, we've all read reviews or just even any piece of art journalism that's written by people who just like don't fundamentally understand their art form. And I'm like, you need to go make some friends with some artists in that industry, because there's something missing there. I mean, I think you need to go make a friend. So long answer.
Right. It's a coherent long answer.
That's why I write, because I speak all over the place.
Do you feel that your position as a critic is compromised if you're friends with the artists that you're like? Does that go against the quote unquote nature of your job? Again, perhaps not understood as a cheerleader connector, but as a display.
Definitely, I think it depends on how close the friendship is, right? So our film critic at the LA Times is very good friends with the writer-director of Minari. So he did not review the movie. He wrote a very beautiful piece about what it's like to watch your friend, write his life story down. And that was a beautiful piece. So I think it definitely can compromise, but I will push for the acquaintance and light networking between critics and artists. I'll say that. I don't know what y'all think.
Anybody want to pitch in?
No, I'm with Ashley. I mean, I always say like I'm friendly with artists, but I don't really have artist friends. Like I'm not gonna go to any artist like quinceañera or wedding or anything like that. But that's something that I decided also on my own, because I want to be able to obviously all of us, we're human beings. We all have a large amount of like biases about so many things. So I don't want to be the person who has to, like applying it in like just like your personal life. You don't want to be the person who tells your friend you suck or like you're doing something really terrible. Like, and if we don't want that in our personal lives, why would we want it professionally? And I was also going to say that when Ashley asked about who started this whole thing about dividing us, it was a bunch of middle-aged cis white men in the 19th century who decided that their taste was the only taste that had to be respected, allowed, and followed. And I, earlier today on another Zoom, I even spoke about how each art form has evolved since their inception. All of them have completely transformed into something else, and they keep evolving. And criticism remains the only one stuck in the 19th century. It's because all of this like gatekeepers that don't let us move forward.
And I love, because you, Jose and Pascal, started taking action against what you feel is gatekeeping by creating both your programs, the Young Critics Program in the case of Pascal and the BIPOC Critics Lab in the case of Jose. Because I'm more familiar with the experience of Jose because I've been part of the Critics Lab. And I would love to, Jose, if you could share what specific things you saw that told you I have to take action. And in the case of Pascal, after that, I would love to see Pascal, because you're a director and educator, you're not a critic. So why, as opposed to creating a program for those areas you focused, you called action onto the critic side? That's interesting to me. Jose, go ahead.
I basically didn't want to be alone. It broke my heart every time that I was in a critics, meeting or a group, or like I'm a member of like a few critics groups. And every time I even went to the theater next, just to be in line waiting for my press tickets, I was tired of being alone. I was tired of being the only person who spoke a language other than English, for example. I was tired of being the only person who didn't come from the same cultural and ethnic background. I was tired of being the only person who didn't go to an Ivy League school, for instance, and who had all of these ideas about, like guidebooks about how ancient people did criticism, and would challenge me when I was wanting to invite different mediums like podcasting or video reviews, for example. I was basically exhausted and I wanted some company. I don't think I have a better reason, a fancier or more intellectually driven reason than that. But also, obviously, living in America and coming to America in my late 20s and just seeing the amount of racism and xenophobia and just like flat out rejection of anything that doesn't fit the parameters of white America. It was just, I felt like I was living in a twilight zone. Like, how are these people not seeing these things that I'm seeing? And I wanted to invite other people to be able to have those conversations with me and with anyone who wants to engage as well.
Thank you, Jose. How about you, Pascal? What led your idea of breaking barriers specifically in the critic side of things?
Yeah, as someone who directs and dramaturgs, I love being able to talk about theater. And I think one of the things that I've always been as an educator, and I've worked in a lot of educational programs all over Boston, and primarily most educational programs are performance-based. It's something to help young people to just experience theater. And rarely do you see programs that foster young people as critics or as directors or as dramaturgs, or things that are a little bit outside of that performance element that we all know and love about theater. And so that was one of my biggest pulls. But the really big thing for me was the same kinds of people were doing the same kinds of reviews in Boston. And I'm not originally from Boston. I'm from Miami, which is a very different world than being here. And when I first moved here and started directing, a lot of things I noticed were the reviews were pretty much the same. And they were normally, you could tell who reviewers really liked and who reviewers would constantly be excited about. And as a new person in the city, I was, really a part of the Fringe Theater Company. And though there's a lot of talk about it, there's not enough press and reviews that have those kinds of new and groundbreaking and, maybe not as traditional theatrical experience, but it's experimental. And there's so much new work happening here in Boston. And it's one of the reasons why I came to the city. And it was just such a disappointment to see that lack of understanding and appreciation for it. And so when I was approached by Don Simmons and Maurice Parent, the co-artistic directors of the Front Porch Arts Collective, they asked me what kind of program would I want to run. And as like I said, I wasn't really interested in a performance program because there are so many here in Boston, and there are so many young people here. There's so many colleges, and there are a lot of great theater programs here, and yet there aren't as many opportunities for young people who may not want to be a performer. And I thought of the Young Critics program just because I didn't see enough of people like me who were talking about the thing I love to do and spend all of my time doing, and then coming to review my show. And, there was an incident a few years ago in Boston where a critic made some very discriminatory and really inappropriate comments about a production. And I think that brought a lot of the people, especially the artists of color here in Boston, it really brought a lot of anger. And, a lot has happened since then. And the Young Critics program has really been an opportunity for us to really see and value the different perspectives in the city, and not just the same 10 to 15 people who are always on those press lists. And I think that's what really drove me to starting this program. And as someone who, like I said, loves theater, I want to be able to see theater through the eyes of so many different kinds of people. And that was my hope and goal for the program. So that's how it kind of came about. And we're still in the very early stages. We're about to, go into our second part of our year 2. We started right before our first year was in 2019. And then our second year happened during the pandemic. So we really didn't get to finish. So our hope is to continue and expand and really provide a pipeline for young people who are either recent graduates or undergrads who are interested in writing and talking about theater and still being a part of the community, but not as a performer.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pascal. Stephen, I wanted to ask you as well, because you're still a graduate student at USC, and you were part of the founding equity board at Annenberg Media, right? So I think that's a great initiative for Annenberg to have. And I wanted to see, not only to know a little bit more of what your achievements have been so far, because at a student level, I think it's very valuable, but also as you start getting professionally into the industry, do you see the same interest in applying, in searching for that professionally, or what have you found yourself with outside of school?
Yeah, yes, no, it's slowly changing, but I'll start with like what Equity Board is. So Equity Board was something that started out of the Poynter College Media Project. So the Poynter Institute kind of like gave funding to various schools to do different projects, and ours was to create at first what was called the Diversity Inclusion Desk. But we didn't want it to be a desk. We wanted it to be something that kind of not infiltrated, but like was part of every single aspect of our newsroom. So for our newsroom, Annenberg Media. So at Annenberg Media, we have TV, we have radio, we have digital, and we have various desks from politics to arts and theater and entertainment. Or arts, culture, and entertainment, we renamed it. But the purpose of it was to encourage more equitable practices in our reporting, because obviously USC is a very white school, it's PWI. So there were plenty of issues that came along the way, and I've done an undergrad as well. So I had witnessed a myriad of different issues that happened. So whenever I decided to do grad school, and the opportunity came up, I decided to kind of focus my efforts that year to address those things and kind of cement something that would hopefully last past the time that I leave, to ensure that reporters have a better understanding of the culture outside of USC, because we are in South Central, and yeah, just have better practices to respect different communities that are at USC and within Los Angeles. So we kind of like provide oversight and insight on all the desks to ensure that everyone's kind of doing the correct things, whether it be like drafting a email in a way that's respectful, especially when it comes to sensitive topics, or editing a certain story in a way so that they're not being discriminatory towards the community, because there have been like different issues that has happened over time. And then as for like how it's received, it's been received well within USC, and I think, you know, there are some newsrooms who are kind of doing it, or like they say that they want to, you know, have an equitable space like that or something like that. There's a few newsrooms that have like diversity initiatives, but the issue that often comes along is like they want to hire more by POC, but they don't have the initiative to change their practices in general. And that's what the Equity Board does. It changes the practices instead of just like bringing people in and saying that they're diverse. And yeah, so like some of the things that we've done, one of the big things that I did was create a style guide for equitable reporting. So it's like a 45-page style guide on like the different ways that reporters can approach a story to be more respectful of communities. So I go over like how to pitch, how to do writing, how to do the interviews, how to approach an interview, and then also common DEI terms that people struggle with within the newsroom. And that has also been, you know, received well from Poynter Institute, and hopefully from other newsrooms. I'm hoping that that kind of, you know, seeing it at a student level kind of impacts how it will be in the future. I mean, journalism is always changing, and I think that this generation is more attentive to upholding those equitable practices. So I hope that over time, you know, those mentalities are able to spread throughout the newsroom. I mean, like even now in my internship, like we're seeing how a lot of the interns who are in undergrad or grad are helping some of the editors kind of see, you know, how journalism can be changed and how it can be more respectful.
Do you feel the editors, as you've experienced them, are responsive to that, or are they still defensive?
They're responsive and defensive. It depends who you're talking to.
Sounds.
But the hope is that, you know, the practice just kind of disseminates from person to person, editor to editor.
Yeah.
And it's just a rough process for journalism at the moment.
Yeah. And is your guide available for the usage of anybody who's interested? Or is it exclusive to Annenberg Media?
Yes, it's open to the public. So if you want to take a look, or you want to see, like, try to make something for your own newsroom, our guide is specifically for Annenberg Media. So like there's certain things that are specific to our newsroom. And I think that's kind of how every guide should be for a newsroom, is to kind of cater to like what issues your newsroom has. I know that BuzzFeed has their own, and I believe LA Times does as well. Yeah.
Awesome. And I do want to make a parenthesis, because I did promise on Twitter that I was going to keep folks that like me like theater and football updated on the score. And the French restaurant, which is down the street, just make a racket. And I realized the game is 3-2, France is winning, minute 79 of the game. So guys, it's going along. It looks like it's going to be France, but if you've been watching, all the games have been going into overtime. So thank you for this sports break. And let me continue on the subject of, I love soccer, you guys. Football. Once there is a critic, and then in these big establishments, there's also the medium itself, right? There's the media. My question is always, we have these programs, we have people who are interested. What is really the entryway? Because I do feel that a lot of us, a good validation, and it's perhaps because where we come from or the lives that we've had, it's different for me to say, hey, I'm a member of the BIPOC Critics Lab. Here's my resume. I would like to write for you. Than, hey, I've been published by the New York Times. Here's my thing. I would like to write for you. So, and in your beautiful bios, there's a lot of that name dropping, which is amazing. It's your experience. And it's also something that still elevates the quality, or it's still associated in our minds to the quality of work. Oh, someone thought this was good enough for the Los Angeles Times. Someone thought this was amazing for this medium. How about all those, what is the road for all those young people that you guys are preparing, or that you are meeting, or that are coming out of school, to either be part of those institutions, which I'm sure like there is excitement out, like it will be exciting to me in many senses, or how do we get the same level of importance to what someone is saying in a smaller medium? What is that journey like? Yes, sir. Taylor Swift.
What World Cup is happening? What are you talking about?
It's not a World Cup. Did I say World Cup? Is a UEFA Euro Cup that was supposed to happen in 2020. It's happening in 2021 because of what we know is a European Championship. So that's, and later also happening right now, it's the South American Championship, and later on it's CONCACAF, which is Central America and North America. More for yeah. You're welcome. You're welcome, world. You can like theater and football at the same time. Thank you for asking, Jose. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm still very confused, but okay. So basically, I would say that my mission as a critic is precisely eradicating that difference. You know, it breaks my heart, for instance, that there have been so many times when I have poured my entire soul and heart into stories that are for, let's say, not legacy publications, and then like no one really reacts to them. Like even, you know, I've done interviews, for instance, where I'm so proud of those interviews that I've done, but they're for like, I don't want to say smaller because I don't like that. I'll keep saying non-legacy, for like a non-legacy outlet. And then not even the artists that I interviewed share them or retweet them or react to them. So in order to break this system that's highly, you know, racist and very exclusive, and there's so much gatekeeping, all of us have to work together to do that. And what do I mean when I say all of us? Like, for instance, every time that I teach a criticism class, especially for, you know, like kids in high school or freshmen in college, I always tell them, like, my assignment for you is to go find a critic, and you get to define what critic means. It can be someone who has a YouTube channel. It can be someone who has this incredible TikTok, like Shehe, for instance. It can be someone who has an amazing Twitter account, and find that person and nurture them. And what I mean by nurture is share their work, engage with them, think twice about publishing, sharing on Facebook if people still use that or whatever. Think twice about sharing, a legacy publication, review, or feature, and instead share that person who no one knows that touched you so much. And that's just like part with, like with audience members and the public. There's also so much of this that's to blame to marketers and publicists, who are the ultimate gatekeepers. They get to choose what gets put in the press releases. They are the ones who choose, for instance, whether they're going to name and mention the critic or the outlet, and they usually just mention the outlet, in a way turning all of us who are not part of like the larger, establishment into, it's a constant act of erasure. Like, I don't want to be called the name of the outlet that people are impressed with. I want to be called by my name. And there's also work to be done in terms of the artist also. Like, if you're an artist and you're talking to, if you're like doing a film junket and you notice that you're talking to the 85th white journalist in a row, put a stop to that. Ask your representatives and ask your publicists to include people from all backgrounds, to include people from lesser known outlets, to not only focus on legacy media. And I know that sounds like a very idealistic goal, but it's the only way that we're going to be able to dismantle that. If all of us, put our part, and all of us actually do the homework. I want to be, I want to be realistic. So I know it's not going to be, it might not even be something that I get to see during my lifetime, but each part in the field gets to, each element in the field gets to play a part. And all the parts right now are geared to not dismantling that, to not challenging that, to only, like maintain the status quo.
That brought me, which is, it has little to do with theater, but it's part of what I think Harry and Meghan are challenging by, it's true, is what they're doing. They're taking all the press requests directly through their website, and they're giving advantage to smaller mediums as well, smaller media, so they can get to know. So it's interesting how, even in different areas, that can work. Like, there is a structure that goes beyond theater criticism, most definitely. You brought, by the way, 3-2. I was dishing out Switzerland, but they're picking up. They still have 4 minutes to make that 3-3. Okay. Jose, you mentioned something about using the reviews to, like, are you using the name? Are you using the media? This is who do you think reviews are for? Because one would think by default, therefore, some artists say, I don't rate reviews, which is awful if it's the work that you do. I'm like, why? I went to see your show, read my review. That seems unequal. Some say reviews are for audiences, so they know what to go watch or what to experience vicariously through the eyes of someone else. And some other people feel reviews are for promotional purposes because this show is happening and they need to sell tickets. So what is the marriage there? What are all three the jobs of a reviewer, or has the importance of a critic or a review being watered down by these uses of qualification or just sales? I mean, Jose, or whoever wants to pitch in with my very twisty way of asking that. You mentioned that specific use of reviews, and at least if you're in New York or you see the lines being picked up. The bigger the media, the better, because it means like my show has pizzazz. like the New York Times says, the Village Voice says, or whatnot. So should reviews worry about that? I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, does media worry about that? Does that fall upon the critic based on your experience, guys?
I would say critics are not consumer reports. Reviews are not meant to be consumer reports. Like Ashley said, if someone wants to talk about a phone specs and details and stuff, they can go to wherever all the tech nerds and geeks, and I mean that as a compliment, gather. But that's not what we're supposed to be doing. Reviews are for anyone and everyone who wants to have a conversation about a piece of art. That includes the artists themselves, producers, publicists, and the audiences in general. Because the way that I think of a critic as is, imagine something happens to you, right? And in this case, we're talking about art. You experience art, you listen to this incredible song, or you see this beautiful painting hanging in a museum, and imagine the first person that you really want to go talk to about this thing that you've just experienced. And that is what a review, and that is what critics are supposed to do. They're like, oh God, I'm dying to go talk to this person about what this means, and maybe unpack things and reveal and discover new layers that maybe because of my, because of my own life experience, I'm not able to see. Reviews are meant to be dialogue, which is why I always insist that if a critic is not on social media reacting and exchanging ideas and thoughts and talking to their readers and the people who interact with their work, they're not critics. They're just judges, who think they're, the Supreme Court of taste. So reviews are not meant to be, it's not our responsibility to sell tickets. If it was, I would love to be on the payroll or the marketing team for someone. That's not our job. And I think that one of the best ways to prove that there's also a disconnect between reviews and money and box office or whatever is that if we go back 20, 30 years or whatever, and we look at the top 10 grossing movies all over the world every year, at least 6 of those were trashed by critics. So that means that in the end, critics don't really get to say what people do with their money. They have no control over your wallet. If I want to go see a trashy movie, I'm going to go see it even if all the newspapers in America say that I shouldn't. So, yeah.
Do you, for example, you Ashley, have you felt that when the specific case, 3-3, it changed right in front of my eyes. I told you this was going to go into overtime because they're all going into overtime. Back to theater. Have you, because I love of your pieces, Ashley, or the latest ones that I've read, I love when critics talk about the world, not as this is the art and this is my opinion after the art has been made. I love when issues are assessed and conversed in a situation that's also inviting for artists, just so to speak, as opposed to, the critic is only here after I do my show and I do the thing to tell me was it worth it or not. So how do you feel? Do you feel a difference in responses, whether it is from users or from artists, when you do a piece that's more geared towards a review versus a piece for example, the one that you did on Music Man most recently, or about that incident about the weight of Broadway, how the weight of Broadway actors has shifted during the pandemic? Do you feel a difference of response from artists in one subject or the other?
So sorry, are you asking about when I write things that aren't reviews and are more about the world, or just
yeah, so if you feel there's because when it comes to conversations, including artists, do you feel a difference rate of response from an artist community, whether you're talking about a general subject or whether you are just doing a review of a show?
Yeah, I'll say honestly, to me, it's one and the same, because when I go see a show, I'm like every other person. I'm a whole human being and I have all these other thoughts. And 2 seconds before the curtain goes down, I'm probably reading about something that's going on in the world, or I'm thinking about my loved ones, or anything like that. And when something is happening on stage, like I can't just, like everyone else, shut out the world. And the best example was like when, and sometimes it's in conversation with the world. Usually playwrights aren't, I mean, people aren't writing things for like, just like in a bubble. So when, you know, What the Constitution Means to Me was on Broadway, while the, what was it, heartbeat bills or the abortion bills were happening, like, you can't not think about the real world headlines or whatever crisis is going on just because you're in a dark room watching the show. So to me, they're all one and the same. So if we're seeing a show that's talking about something in the real world, I cannot just review it or write about it and ignore what's happening in the real world. Like, I don't see the delineation as like super hard, right? Especially now, like with people who, and we're all guilty of it, we're watching TV shows and movies and digital theater while scrolling on our phones and or talking to our significant others or whatever. So yeah, I am following the lead of many other writers I admire who are kind of like embracing and appreciating those natural conversations that happen. I think artists appreciate that. I think readers appreciate that. I mean, if we all had the ability to compartmentalize and just write about things as just like solo endeavors, that's great. But so often artists are creating in response to the world, and like, I should therefore respond accordingly. As far as writing things, thanks, Pascal, you're so sweet. As far as writing things that aren't, you know, formal reviews and like taking on different topical issues, I mean, if I am part of a legacy media and I can shine a light on these things that aren't being discussed and they're just being, you know, vented on social media, like, why not? So I'm enjoying it. It is getting a response. I have a lot of cool things coming up. So, and I think more critics should do that. I love that critics can evaluate a piece of work and contextualize it and archive it and do all the good things we've talked about. But critics are also journalists, they're also reporters. And just the way that playwrights are going into TV and movies and whatever else. I don't know why old school critics are so rigid as to, oh, this is not a review, I'm not doing it. You need to hire a younger, more eager reporter to do it. Okay, we know what that means, so I'll say that.
We also know several young, eager BIPOC reporters, if anybody is interested. What if we're talking then that critics are everywhere? Everyone's a critic. I'm going to Ratatouille. And we're not saying that any specific education is necessary, talking about, again, breaking barriers to enter. What is something that should be expected from a critic from your end? What do you feel it's something that a critic should have or should reflect in their work? You want to jump in, Stephen? Oh, go ahead. Go, Pascal. Okay. No, Pascal, go. And then
yeah, I know for me, you know, that's something I think about a lot when I'm thinking about our next cohort of young critics. And I look for, you know, young people. And so often I think in this criticism world, there is an elitism of the exposure to the art as well. And as we all know, most art is inaccessible to people who look like us, whether that's financially or that's location and geography. And I think, you know, one of the things I always look for in young critic applicants is their desire to be a part of the conversation of the arts world, whether that's specific to theater, music, film. And I think, you know, Ashley said it best, we're in a time now where so many art is really becoming a part of the entire ecosystem, and playwrights are becoming TV writers, and these kinds of things that we find ourselves being limited to just one field I don't think that's a thing that we can continue to believe anymore, and that people are multifaceted and artists are multifaceted. And so I look for young people who are interested in having those critical conversations and aren't afraid to shy away from the conversations that might be challenging, not only for artists, but also for the community that is engaging in that art. And I think that's what's so exciting right now about the ability that everyone is a critic. There is more of a conversation that leads us to make the art better and to have better conversations about how we make this art work better. And I think, one of the things that's been so exciting to see is this big conversation everyone's been having about In the Heights. And, I know so many people are excited about it, but it's so great to see that we can have these critical conversations about this art and still appreciate that this piece is still so important to the ecosystem of not only the performing arts, but arts in general. And so, I'm looking for people who are eager to have those challenging conversations, be willing to, give a perspective that we very rarely see, and not be afraid to show themselves through their writing. And I think, there's so many exciting things happening now in the writing world. And, like I said, Ashley's work is such an example of how much we are able to have these conversations that I know me and my theater friends have at home. So when I saw Ashley's article about the Music Man, I was like, I was just talking to the students about this. So I think this is what's so great about this moment, that there is more opportunity. And even with, I think so often the saturation of social media can feel like, what does it mean to be a critic? But I think there is something so great about everyone having that opportunity to speak now and feel that they can speak. Because I think for so long, there was this kind of, this need for only certain people being able to comment on certain art, certain movies, certain TV, certain theater. And it's so great to see that we're in a time now where people are accepting and being able to open up the field to more and different kinds of perspectives, because we've been long needing it. And so I think that's a little bit of the things that I know I look for young critics and for people who are interested in that field.
Thank you, Pascal. How about you, Stephen? What do you think what is something that you expect from a critic?
Yeah, I was just gonna say pretty much what Pascal also said, but just to add to it, just being honest with how you feel and how the art makes you feel. At the end of the day, it's about sharing what emotions came up to you, and like you said at the beginning, like it's easy to get caught up in like, oh, a critic has to sound like this. I mean, I fell into that trap a lot at the beginning, where it was like, oh, a critic has to sound like this. It has to be formatted like this. But it's just about sharing what that art is and helping people like understand it better from like, and add to that conversation. And then also like what Pascal said, like the social media is a great example of that, and how everybody can be a critic, and like those kinds of conversations are exactly what criticism can do and should be able to do. Yeah.
Great. No, I like, for me, if I may, I feel like something that's often forgotten is it's a humanity and kindness, and not fake kindness. Just and I think I've spoken about this with Jose. It's about just saying things that you would say to the person's face. And it seems that at times, not only, I mean, big critics occasionally, but, in the theater world at least, but the social media sometimes is used as a shield to precisely not do that. And then in that way, you're not contributing to the conversation. You're just a one-way shouter that just wants to be heard or needs some sort of validation, but it's not really part of the conversation. So you can still have your own opinion. It doesn't have, like, I'm distrustful of critics that like everything. I usually, I'll go like, why do you like everything? What is it that you don't like? I'm interested in that. But you can not have enjoyed something and still be kind and human about it, and recognize the work, and recognize that may be something that perhaps is better suited for someone with different experiences. I wanted to know, in the specific case of Stephen and Pascal also, who come from an artist more, although I love, and this is very true what you said, Ashley, that I think criticism in itself is a piece of art. as artists, are you, and this in a way relates to the previous question, but when you create a piece of art, whether it is a dance, whether it is a play, or when you're contributing with artists and you invite a critic in, what do you, I guess you expect them to join the conversation, but what is have you been receiving that when you invite people? Has that been changing on your end, or do you feel that you're not quite still getting that from as an artist when you invite critics to see your work?
I know for me, it's a very interesting relationship. I feel like there are a few critics in the city of Boston that I know well because of the program I've created. Mostly because they know that there will need to be a next generation. So why not be a part of that coming of the passing of the next torch. So I think there's such an interesting relationship that I am building as an artist and as this the spearhead of this program. And I think so often there are certain critics that I'm always excited to talk to about the work that I'm making. Sometimes they are younger, or they are more similar to me, so that connection is a little bit different. And I think it really is about how they approach or how they are excited about the work. A lot of the times my work is very, how do I say this? It challenges a lot of white supremacy. And so often the critics I talk to are white. And I think there's always an interesting conversation about, what does it mean to talk about white supremacy, try to dismantle it in theater in the work that I'm doing, and then talk to a white man or a white woman about it. So that's always an interesting opportunity of what does this kind of work mean, especially who that audience is. So it's been an interesting time, moment. I don't know what to call it really, but I think that's what makes, this relationship between artist and critic is so interesting, because I think so often artists, especially like myself, feel like these critics have our careers in their hands. And so often we feel that if we are not, if we don't give them what they want, then neither will our careers get what they want. And I think that's a hard thing to deal with so often as a young and emerging artist. And so for me, I think it's a delicate balance of what that relationship is like. So and again, it's even more of a balance for me as someone who is creating a program that is trying to make more opportunities for young people to be critics. But I think so often one of the things I try to remind myself is these critics are, this criticism is important, and I appreciate it for myself because I know it will make me better. But it does have it does feel very odd sometimes not knowing what the result will be or just what will come of it. But I don't know if that's just how it's meant to be. I hope it doesn't, but I think that is how it is at this moment, at least in Boston.
How about you, Stephen?
For me, criticism has been, or like my relationship has been very open, I think. A lot of the work that I do is like in theater for social change. So it's like working with different like community organizations and things. And usually that's not on the radar of like white critics. So I have like a better relationship with the critics who come to like or view my work and talk about it. And I think that the conversation that happens out of it is really interesting, especially like whenever I did, I think it was Race Relay at the California African American Museum. A lot of the stuff that came out of that were interesting because we could see how it like touched specific people and how the critics were not afraid to like share their own experiences with racism. And I think in those kinds of moments, whenever I'm interacting with critics, I think it's really interesting because I get to see them as who they are. And I think that's like a great way to look at criticism. I haven't experienced too much with a lot of like white critics or like critics from like legacy publications. But yeah, so far it's been interesting. But there was something else I was gonna say. Yeah, I think I'll just end it at that.
Great. I'm unmuted now. considering what we just theater and us all as humans went through this past year, what did you learn or what did you discover about your work as a critic, aside from, I guess, the new flow of multimedia work? But what did you discover about your work as a critic during the pandemic that you were surprised, whether it is from a technical side, from an active side of you writing? That's a question for all of you.
I'm a much braver writer and reporter when I don't have to code switch in an office, when I don't have to deal with a traffic commute and unwinding from all of that, and when I can hang out with my dog in the middle of the day.
Nice. Have you been able to manage even at home, Ashley, the separation between I'm now in me time versus I'm now in work time?
It is an ongoing struggle, but looking back at how much I have written about theater or theater adjacent topics in the past year, when in-person live traditional as we know it theater has not happened, I couldn't have written those pieces even up to The Music Man if I personally didn't have this time to pause and wrestle with my illusions and biases about the theater industry, that Broadway is best, that the more expensive, the more bigger star, the better the show. Is it? And things like that. So that's been fun. And I think not just in terms of different topics that I've tried to touch on, but also just like, more interesting article structures or, interesting sentence structures and different, writerly things like that. I've enjoyed getting to experiment the way that artists do in their work too. So I am thankful for it this past year.
Nice. Did you also, and this is, I still want to know what you guys learn or discover, but like add also to that, do you feel that when it comes to editors or to the media powers that be, were they more open to different things that they had been in the past as well, or that it's not even a consideration?
For me personally, yes, definitely, because the LA Times went through its own reckoning with how we report and how we do our jobs, the way that many other creative industries did. So I'm thankful for that so many people have been open to learn. And I second what people have said earlier, that Stephen, what you said, that some editors are defensive or responsive, and everybody comes at it at their own time. But to see the arc that has happened in the theater industry also happen within the journalism industry has been very convenient. So I have appreciated that.
Nice, thank you, Ashley. Who wants to share next? What did you learn or discover about your work or your job as a critic during the pandemic? Jose, go ahead.
I learned that as much as I love my job, I am not my job. And because of that inability to, separate me time from work time, the emotional and psychological toll that had on me almost killed me. And that is something that I discovered during the pandemic, that I cannot, sacrifice myself and my physical, my health and my mental health because of how much I love my job. And part of that was related to something that I was reminded of during the pandemic. And it's something that I've always known. And it's that critics, almost like politicians, have a responsibility to want to see and to create a better world, which is why I would say that critics need, patience, passion, and cojones in order to be a critic. Because all the things that I ended up doing, because it was so surreal for me, because I ended up having the most incredible year of my career during the pandemic. I did things that I didn't know I was capable of doing. And they were all things that all I did was remind myself that I didn't need permission from anyone to do them. So as in New York, as a queer immigrant, I've always been on the outside in so many different ways. And I seem to have forgotten that along the way. So during the pandemic, I had to remember that, hey, no one's going to come change the world in my name. I have to be the one who paves the road and who builds the house that they want to live in. So that was a beautiful reminder. I just hope I had taken better care of myself.
Thank you, Jose. How about you, Pascal?
Yeah, I think, Jose, I relate so much to some of the things you just said too. And I think so much of what I've learned in this year, and sometimes I used to think about it a little bit, but I think about it even more now, is just the importance of accessibility to people, especially for the arts. And I think so often, before the pandemic, we thought of art as such a finite experience, and right in that moment. And though there was such excitement and there was so great of experience to do that, it does cause less and less people to be a part of it. And as an educator, I always strive to give my students opportunities to see themselves and see as much work as they can. And I think the pandemic really opened up that opportunity for us to realize that there is more of a way for us to experience this art. And I think it also opened up the different kinds of ways we can do this. And I think that paving of the road thing was something else that it really illuminated for me. I don't know if we would have had the reckoning we did in the last year without the pandemic. And though the pandemic has been, and is still happening, it still has been traumatic for so many. I think being able to have these difficult conversations in the last year has been so instrumental to the future. And I think so often many people have been having those conversations, have been waiting for the opportunity for other bigger institutions to change. And I think that change is coming, or at least I'm going to try to uphold the people who say they're going to change. And I think that's what's been really exciting in the pandemic. I think, a lot of us are feeling like we don't have to be silent anymore, and we do have the power to make the change we want to see in this world. And I'm hopeful that it just, continues and grows and really gives us a future that we've all been looking forward to.
Thank you, Pascal. How about you, Stephen? What did you discover?
I discovered a few things. One was like what I consider criticism and what I consider art. So like, what does criticism look like? Like, it doesn't always have to be like text. It can be like different mediums, and can, still have the same impact as like what you'd expect a text piece could have. And also like what you expect art to be. When I think about how I looked at criticism before, especially when it comes to dance, there was a lot of like misconception, like, you can only like critique things that are on stage or something like that. And then I started to, since everything was online, I was like, okay, well then why can't I critique a music video? Or why can't I critique like the dance that was in this show or this episode? Or just anything. I think that I was able to like extend the bounds of what art can be and what art is, and the value of that art, because in a lot of media, like, we see art that deserves criticism as something that's very specific, and I don't think that's true anymore, or ever should be. And then another thing that happened is I started to embrace my voice a lot more, and that also kind of extends into my dance practice, because when I'm dancing on stage, like in front of an audience, I'm very much like interacting with the people in front of me, and having that kind of conversation as well, because, a certain movement or a certain thing that I do may, grab someone's attention, or like if an audience member is over here, I might embrace the movement over here a lot more. But because I didn't have that, and a lot of the work that I was doing was specifically video, I got to embrace my own movement and kind of find the power in it. So like I was dancing for me, essentially. And I kind of translated that to writing as well. I didn't have to think about like, oh, who am I writing this for? Like, blah, blah, blah. Like I'm writing it for me, and I'm writing it because I care about this piece of art and I want people to hear about why I care about this piece of art. So those are the ways that I've kind of changed over the pandemic.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. As lovers of theaters, have you discovered yourself leaning towards consuming as a different or new type of criticism, or are you reading or enjoying the same thing as a theater fan and as a theater goer? If you do read criticism, or if like I've been in TikTok, just listening to conversations there, which is exhausting and fascinating at the same time. By the way, this game is still 3-3. They're still playing. Poor people.
You know, it's funny you asked that question, because I think I hate saying this, but I think I still go to the same kinds of critics, especially in the New York Times. And I'm trying to dismantle those desires and those needs in my own practice, because I think so often it's so entrenched, and especially in the theater world, I feel, you know, just like you were saying before, so often a show or something we're excited about has that New York Times says this, and I think unfortunately that is like my first go-to, and I don't know if that'll ever change, or if it'll be like there's a multitude of places I go to, but I know there are a few writers that I follow, one here, Ashley Lee, and you know, I think that's what gets me excited about the work, and being able to experience other writers and really, and I think, you know, one of the things that I've seen a lot is a lot of new up and coming small blogs that are talking about theater, especially here in Boston, that have been really exciting to engage with outside of the typical Globe articles. And I think that's something I'm trying really hard to interact with a little bit more and make that more of an effort. And I think I think sometimes the algorithms of the internet make it really hard to find the smaller or the non-legacy, I love that phrase, Jose, the non-legacy kinds of publications that are still talking about the work. Because I think a lot, and I think of like 3 Views Theater that, you know, has that different perspective in how we even engage with theater. And so it's just really trying to open up the usual aspects of places that we engage with that I know I'm always trying to incorporate more in my practice as an artist and as an educator. But I think sometimes, you know, the computer makes it really hard for you to get to certain people. So I know there is a desire to get away from that. So I'm trying more and more to find those people, because they're the ones we should be uplifting.
I think a way to go outside of that is actually making searches in their own computer that will just throw the algorithm off. Even if having conversations out loud, because I know you're listening Google behind there. It's interesting. I've been playing a game, which is ridiculous. I love it. I learned every country in the world, and the game works like there's a lady that says the name of the country and you have to click it. And I've noticed suddenly getting news about Uzbekistan, and there's no reason for that other than the Google hearing Uzbekistan every time the lady says it. So just for everybody that wants breaking out of the algorithm, you know, these things are trying to help us. Like, we know you like this, here you go. But how then do we serve in doing what we preach, in seeing all these new media when we are trapped by the media that we tend to go to the most and that the system is trying to feed us the most? Would anybody else like to share that specific, if you have been consuming a new type of criticism as an art lover yourself?
I'll say that, like, I am trying to continue, as excited as I am of the thought of, you know, more reviews about a thing. I am all for more commentary pieces, more journalism about a thing, especially when sometimes the review is not the most effective way to spotlight something for some reason, because maybe it's better served by a commentary piece or an interview with a below the line designer or something like that. So I'm trying to look at the choices people are making when they're not writing a review, and looking at like the insights that are written there or the observations, and like, so that I can do the same kind of work too. Like if I'm not reviewing something, but like, how can I still add to the conversation outside of this, you know, traditional format that we're all trying to break? Like, let's consume everything else as well around it, and like also produce different types of things about a piece of work.
Thank you, Ashley. Just to finish, I would like to know, what is something that excites you about theater right now, and perhaps something that worries you about theater right now? Looking, hopefully you have both, or maybe you only are worried and there's no joy in theater right now. But yeah, I think that's a nice way as to wrap up, as you are, after all, not only critics but cheerleaders and lovers of different types of arts. So what is something right now that's exciting for you in theater, and something that worries you about theater?
Okay, I'll go. I'm excited about the way in which we were reminded that theater is everywhere, and how we were reminded that, you know, even for some place like New York, which often deems itself like the theater capital of the world, New York is extremely provincial and limited and narrow-minded. You know, we don't get to see much theater in language other than English. And in terms of like access for tourists, you know, like Broadway's always talking about like how we want tourists and stuff. And there's almost no plays and musicals that have like super titles, or that are like, you know, that have you know, that are being like what's like
translation,
called,
like a theater.
yeah, yeah, that doesn't exist. Like theater, you know, hasn't changed in that way. So it excites me that now some people know that there's theater outside of New York, and it's all over the world. It's in the subway, it's in your neighborhood, it's an Animal Crossing, it's all over the internet, it's on Instagram, it's on TikTok, and that excites me. What worries me is something that worries me about the world in general, and it's that once the vaccine rollout started, it's kind of like we forgot that we're in the middle of a mess, and like, you know, Broadway went back to their old practices, and they're checking boxes and pretending that they're playing a game of like diversity. But I just want to remind everyone of what happened in 2016 when Hamilton came out, and it was, you know, the Tonys were like Tonys for everyone who's not white, and then the next year they went back to white winners, you know, everywhere. So it worries me that we will have a short-term memory, and that we will forget everything that we have been fighting for and everything that we have been trying to change, just because we're crazy to leave the house and go be entertained and go not be on our own or with our family or like our partners or whatever. So that worries me, which is why, you know, the excitement and the worry are almost parallel systems. And I keep reminding, especially younger artists and younger critics, that we might not be able to radically change things overnight, which is why I propose that we create parallel systems. We're always going to be fighting this system that's, you know, centuries old, and it's white supremacy and so many other terrible things that infiltrate every level of every part of our existence, not only art, which is why we need to kind of like ignore that, fight it and ignore it and heal ourselves, but also create a system that is inclusive and welcoming for all of us. So it's double the work, unfortunately, but it's the only way that we're going to be able to give ourselves, you know, the space that we deserve as human beings.
Thank you, Jose. How about you, Pascal? Something that excites you and worries you about theater?
Yeah, I think it's very similar. I think, you know, for being quarantined for so long, I think we're all excited to come back. And I think there has been such a desire for work that is new and challenging and isn't status quo, is non-traditional, which is the most exciting for me as someone who loves new play development, but I think, you know, just like Jose says, there is a worry of how we are coming back and how quickly we can go back to the way things are, because I think there is just such I think just it takes time for that change to be genuine, to be authentic. And I think sometimes people can get tired very quickly and not realize how hard that work is and how much time that work takes. And I, you know, I feel like it's the double edge of social media. Sometimes there is such great things that comes for it, but I think the trending world makes things easy to be trending for a bit. And then when it's not trending, people stop caring. So I worry about the level of caring there will continue to be about a lot of the things that brought us to the reckoning that we are, I know, still in and still trying to continue. I think that is my worry, the regression of coming back and forgetting. But I know that there are people in this room as examples who are trying to, you know, remind everyone of what these issues are and that we need to continue to talk about them and change them. So I hope that in that worry that we are still able to continue that work and talk about it and not let it go away. Because I'm not trying to. I know that's all I do. So that's what I plan to do, at least.
Thanks, Pascal. How about you, Stephen?
I'd say that mine is also pretty similar. The one thing that excited me was the innovation that people have now to embrace like different forms of media. So like that's audio, that's video. And I think that, you know, incorporating that into live performance may be interesting as well. And I think, yeah, just like the innovating with how art looks is really exciting for me. And then in terms of things that worry me, similarly, I worry that people will forget about the promises that they made. So like around the time of the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, there are all these theaters who were making promises that things would change, that casting would change and everything would change. But I'm worried that like now that we're at this point where things are starting to open up, that they're going to forget. And that kind of worries me to see like who will, you know, uphold that promise and who will forget. Yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. Ashley.
I'm worried about any smaller theater companies or venues that have really struggled, you know, whether or not they've been able to adapt digitally and pull in money or get, you know, the grants and things like that. There have been a lot of local LA companies that have been doing the work for a long time, and yet they've been hanging by a thread, and the pandemic was rough and continues to be rough. So I worry about that in LA and beyond. I am excited about audiences not forgetting everything that we've been learning. Even if theaters do forget, I don't think audiences can unsee things. We've seen sea changes like this in other industries, as far as like, you know, going more towards sustainable fashion or plant-based food or things like that. So I'm hoping that audience demand will make these changes permanent. I'm excited to see works by Black playwrights that aren't in February. I'm excited to see them written by playwrights who are still alive and not, you know, showcasing Black pain. Like, I'm excited for these permanent changes to take hold due to audience demand. Like, theater is still a business. So like, if we want these changes, we need to show up for them as well. So yeah, I'm hopeful.
Thank you so much. And that's I think that I share a lot of your worries and a lot of your joys as well. And as a performer, I do want to see performers giving themselves their value, because there's always, it's you know, for as excited as one should be for theater coming back, there's also a cloud over it that you're like, do I want to go back to how things were before? I don't know. I'm not sure if I just want to go make a 3-hour audition line for, do I? Thank you so much for sharing your afternoon with us and for your beautiful insights and for the beautiful thoughts and ideas that you expressed. The game is still 3-3. These guys are going to penalty kicks. That's awful. That's awful. That's never fair. We'll see if Broadway goes to penalty kicks as well. Haha. See how I did that? And I want to thank Francisco, of course, and the Playwrights Realm for not always being great in your own way to act on what you preach, and to take care of, in this case, critics and international performers especially. I think you do a wonderful job, and I was honored that you asked me to help you set this whole meeting up today. Thank you so much for having us today, Francisco.
Well, I would say we were right on the money because you did a wonderful job. Thank you, Scheherazade, and all the panelists. This was amazing. Thank you so much for devoting your time to this, and thank you to everyone who watched. The two things I wanted to say is there will be a survey when you end the meeting and in your email. So please do answer that. It helps us guide, especially now that we're planning for next season. We want to keep working on the community program, and it's not going away. And also there will be a YouTube recording, which will also be able to feel free to share that. And that's all. Thank you everyone for coming today.